She was the most difficult with the men she wanted most. That is the inversion most men never receive clearly enough to act on. They assume that a woman who is interested makes it easy. That attraction produces warmth, openness, the relaxed generosity of someone who has already decided. They operate on this assumption and then find themselves confused, sometimes devastated, by the woman who clearly felt something and then made everything harder the moment the feeling deepened. The cutting remark. The test disguised as a casual comment. The sudden withdrawal at precisely the moment things were going well. The impossible standard. The comparison that lands with surgical precision on the one place he least wanted her to reach. He experienced all of it as rejection, as evidence that he had misread the situation, as the signal that what he felt was not reciprocated or was no longer reciprocated, and that he should probably recalibrate his investment downward before it cost him more than it already had. He was wrong. And the cost of being wrong about this particular thing is staggering, because it causes men to retreat from the connections most worth fighting for, and to stay in the ones that require no effort because they generate no genuine feeling. Picture her in a conversation that had been easy and warm for 20 minutes. Something shifts. She says something slightly sharp, not vicious but pointed. Something designed to create friction. He feels the change and immediately goes into management mode. Softer, more careful, more attentive to restoring the warmth. She watches him manage it. Something in her calibrates downward. She didn't test the men she was indifferent to. She reserved that, unconsciously, almost helplessly, for the ones who actually moved her. This video will hand you the precise psychological mechanism behind female testing, what it actually is, why it intensifies with attraction rather than diminishing, and what the man she was most deeply interested in did that the others never figured out. You have felt the specific confusion of this pattern, and it leaves a mark unlike most other relational pain, because it contains a double wound. The first wound is the test itself, the sharpness, the unfairness, the moment where something that was going genuinely well suddenly required you to prove yourself in a way that felt unreasonable. The second wound, deeper and less easily named, is the response you gave to it. The softening, the over-explaining, the immediate reorganization of your behavior around restoring her warmth. The visible demonstration that her friction had created, in you, precisely the anxiety she was watching for. You did not recognize the test as a test. You recognized it as a threat to something you wanted to keep, and you responded to the threat the way men who care respond, which is by trying to remove it. By becoming more palatable. By sacrificing some degree of your own position to recover the warmth that had been withdrawn. And then something shifted in her. Not dramatically, but perceptibly. The quality of her engagement changed. Not because she was cruel. Because she received information in your response that she had been looking for without knowing she was looking. A man is on a third date that has been going genuinely well. She says something, a comparison, a slight edge in a remark, that lands with unexpected weight. He feels it. He immediately begins managing the conversation toward lighter ground. He becomes warmer, more careful, more deliberate in his humor. He is trying to repair something he didn't break. She lets him do it. She watches him do it. The evening ends pleasantly. He does not get a fourth date. He does not understand why. The evening had been good. She had laughed. She had seemed engaged. He had handled the difficult moment with patience and care. He handled it. That was the problem. The difficult moment was not a problem to be handled. It was a question to be answered. And his answer told her everything. Understanding what the question actually was, and what kind of answer she was actually looking for, is the mechanism that changes everything. The mechanism is not manipulation. That is the first thing that needs to be stated clearly, because most men who encounter this framing for the first time hear it as permission to feel victimized by a calculated process. Female testing is not calculated. It is instinctive, a biological interrogation that runs beneath conscious awareness, driven by a nervous system that has evolved to verify one specific thing before committing to genuine vulnerability. Is this man who I think he is, or is the version of him I've been experiencing a performance that dissolves under pressure? Call this authenticity verification. Her attraction to him has been building. Something about him has generated the particular pull that does not arrive frequently. Her instincts, in response, do the only thing they know how to do with high-value feeling: they test it. They create conditions under which the authentic structure of the man is forced to reveal itself. The test is not designed to damage the connection. It is designed to determine whether the connection is safe to deepen. Whether the man who was compelling under easy conditions remains himself under difficult ones. Contrast this clearly. Two men receive the same test: a sharp comment, an unfair comparison, a sudden withdrawal of warmth at a critical moment. The first man feels the test as threat and responds defensively or appeasingly, either pushing back with anxiety or softening to restore comfort. Both responses tell her the same thing: his position is contingent on her approval. He moved. The second man receives the same test and remains where he was. Not cold, not reactive. He acknowledges the friction without being altered by it. His composure does not require her warmth to maintain itself. His position does not shift in response to her pressure. Picture the second man receiving her sharp remark. He pauses. He looks at her with the equanimity of someone who is neither threatened nor dismissive. He responds to what she actually said, not to the threat it implied. And then he continues being himself. She goes slightly still. Something in her recalibrates. He didn't manage the test. He passed it by not treating it as something that required managing. What this looks like across the full spectrum of real interactions, across the dozens of ways testing actually arrives in lived dynamics, is the section that transforms this from theory into recognition. The tests are not always sharp. Some of the most consequential ones are almost invisible. The softness test. She states an opinion, not aggressively, but with conviction. She watches to see if he holds his own view or quietly moves toward hers to reduce friction. The man who adjusts communicates, without words, that his position is negotiable under social pressure. The man who holds his ground while remaining genuinely open to real persuasion communicates something entirely different: that he has views that are actually his. The withdrawal test. Things are going well, unusually well. She suddenly becomes slightly less warm, slightly less available, slightly less engaged than she was. Not dramatically, just enough. She is watching to see if his equilibrium holds, or if the withdrawal immediately reorganizes his behavior toward restoring her warmth. The man who chases the warmth teaches her that his stability was contingent on her provision of it. The man who remains settled teaches her that his stability is his own. The comparison test. She mentions someone else, an ex, a colleague, a man from her past or present, in a way that is slightly pointed, designed, consciously or not, to produce jealousy or insecurity. The man who reacts defensively confirms that his confidence in the connection was fragile enough to be disturbed by a name she introduced. The man who receives it without visible disturbance communicates something closer to what she was actually testing for: that he is secure enough in his own position that a comparison does not constitute a threat. It shows up in the dinner table disagreement, the moment she takes an opposing position on something that matters and watches whether he backs down at the first sign of friction or stands in his truth while remaining genuinely attentive to hers. The reframe that reorganizes everything. She is not creating difficulty because she wants things to be difficult. She is creating conditions under which the man she is considering investing in fully must reveal whether his composure is real or performed. The composed man is not the one who never feels the test. He feels it. He is simply not governed by it. And that absence of governance, the visible reality that her emotional pressure does not alter his position, is the answer she has been waiting for since the testing began. What that answer means at the deepest level, what it reveals about desire, vulnerability, and the most fundamental dynamic in attraction, is the section this entire script was built toward. Here is the layer beneath everything, and it requires honest reception to land. A woman tests the men she is most attracted to because vulnerability, for her, carries a specific and serious cost. The more she feels pulled toward a man, the more genuinely at risk she becomes. At risk of investing in someone who cannot hold himself under pressure. At risk of building something with a man whose identity collapses the moment she stops providing the warmth that was holding it up. At risk of falling fully for something that turns out to be a performance rather than a person. The testing is not cruelty. It is the nervous system's attempt to verify that the risk is worth taking. to determine, before full emotional commitment is made, whether the man who has generated this much feeling has the actual structural integrity to sustain what would happen if she gave him everything. She tests hardest the men she trusts most with her vulnerability. And what most men experience as rejection is actually the highest form of consideration she knows how to offer. That is the line that divides the comments. But it holds. The man she is indifferent to receives none of her friction, none of her edge, none of her creative difficulty. She is pleasant with him and forgets him. The man she tests is the man she is considering in a way that frightens her, and the testing is her way of asking, beneath every provocation, whether he is real enough to be frightened toward. Contrast this with how it is experienced on the receiving end. He experiences the sharpness as signal to retreat, as evidence that the connection is not what he thought, as reason to reduce investment and protect himself from further exposure. He reads her intensity as rejection when it is, in fact, the opposite of rejection. It is the specific, high-cost attention that accompanies genuine desire. Picture a woman at home after a difficult interaction with a man she was actually drawn to. She was harder with him than she meant to be. Something in her regrets the sharpness, not because she manufactured it consciously, but because the depth of her interest produced it automatically. She wonders if she pushed too hard. She is hoping he held his ground. She is not hoping he was unaffected. She is hoping he was affected and stayed anyway. That distinction is the entire truth of what the test is asking. Not for a man who feels nothing, for a man who feels everything, and remains himself regardless. What it means to be that man, and what it asks of the man receiving this is not a behavioral adjustment. It is an identity-level shift. And the shift begins here. The shift is not about becoming immune to her tests. A man who feels nothing when she creates friction is not a strong man. He is an absent one. She cannot desire someone she cannot reach. The goal is not unreachability. The goal is stability under reach. The stable man feels the test. He feels the sharpness, the withdrawal, the pointed comparison. He is not made of stone. He simply has a floor that does not shift in proportion to her pressure. His composure does not require her warmth to maintain its level. His confidence does not run on her approval. And so when the approval is withdrawn or tested, the floor holds. That floor is not built in the moment of the test. It is built in the months before, in the accumulation of decisions to be genuinely himself, to hold his own positions under social pressure, to develop a relationship with his own judgment that is stronger than his need for any particular person's validation of it. The man with that floor receives her test differently, not as attack, not as rejection, as information specific, useful, and somewhat clarifying. She is testing because she cares. She is difficult because she is afraid of being wrong about someone she has already begun to trust. Her friction is, paradoxically, the evidence of her interest. A man who understands that her testing is the most honest form of desire she has available to her stops being wounded by it, and starts being useful to her in the only way that actually matters. Contrast the man who collapses under her friction, who becomes apologetic, who softens, who reduces himself to restore the warmth, with the man who holds. She forgets the first man within weeks. She thinks about the second one for years. If this is reaching something that is more recognition than information, if some part of you is locating a specific interaction in what's being described, stay with it. Because what follows is where the understanding becomes actionable in a specific and important way. The warning is aimed directly at the man who has understood this intellectually and is now constructing a performance around it. He is going to start holding positions not because they are genuinely his but because he has learned that position holding produces a positive response. He is going to practice a kind of calculated composure, checking his reactions before they arrive, monitoring his performance for signs of weakness, passing her tests through deliberate effort rather than structural stability. This will work for a limited time and then collapse. Because what she is testing for is not the performance of stability. It is the reality of it. The test is specifically designed to locate the gap between the performed and the actual, and sustained proximity reveals that gap with the precision of pressure applied to a surface that appears solid but contains fault lines. A man who passes tests through technique has not become someone who passes tests. He has become someone managing his anxiety in a more sophisticated costume. The lesson is structural, not behavioral. A man who has genuinely built an interior, genuine standards, genuine direction, genuine self-possession that preceded this relationship and will outlast it, does not need technique to pass her tests. He responds from who he actually is. And who he actually is under pressure is exactly what she was testing for. Picture a man who has done this work. She tests him with the particular sharpness she reserves for the men who move her. He receives it with the equanimity of someone who has encountered his own limits in harder conditions than this and found them solid. He is not performing composure. He is composed. She feels the difference in the first 30 seconds. Something opens in her that was guarded. What becomes possible in that opening? In the specific, rare dynamic created when a genuinely grounded man meets a woman who has finally found something worth testing hard, is the final section of this video. This is the full picture, assembled. The woman who tests hardest is not the most difficult woman. She is the most invested one. She is the one for whom the stakes are highest, whose attraction has reached the specific, frightening depth where she genuinely cannot afford to be wrong. And her tests are the only honest language she has for a question she cannot ask directly. Are you real, and will you remain real when I stop making it easy for you? The man who understands this stops experiencing her friction as a signal to retreat and starts experiencing it as what it actually is. The evidence that something between them is real enough to require verification. That the feeling she has generated in herself is significant enough to warrant the risk of testing its object. Most men fail this test not because they are wrong for her. They fail because they were never handed the translation. They read her difficulty as rejection, responded with retreat or management, and gave her the one answer that confirmed her fear. That the man she had been feeling something for was actually organized around her approval, and therefore not safe to fully invest in. The most desired men in a woman's life are not the ones who made everything easy. They are the ones who held steady when she made everything hard. That holding calm, warm, entirely itself under pressure is the answer to every test she has ever run. Not the absence of feeling. The presence of a self that feeling cannot destabilize. If this channel is consistently delivering the kind of precision that changes how you understand what is actually happening in your dynamics, not just what to do, but why the thing you did produced the result it produced, subscribe. More of this is coming. If you know a man who has been confused and wounded by a woman's difficulty, who read her friction as rejection and retreated from someone who was actually reaching, share this with him. He may need this more than he knows. Leave a comment with this: what is the hardest test a woman ever put you through, and do you understand now what she was actually asking? Because the answer to that question, held honestly, is where everything about this dynamic finally becomes navigable. She didn't test you because she doubted you. She tested you because she couldn't afford to be wrong about you. And that is the most honest thing she ever said.